Anyway.
Shall I tell who I am?
Yes, go on.
You tell us.
I'm Dr. Ann Dinsdale, and I'm a historian and a textile artist. And I did a PhD 30 odd years ago at Thames Poly as a mature student. And that was about these 1,499 wonderful women who signed the 1866 suffrage petition. But I've gone on studying them, and I've actually found life stories for around 95% of them, most of which are quite brief: birth, death, couple of censuses. But for some people, one's lucky, and the lovely lady Celeste Sinibaldi is the person I'm going to talk to about today. And there's almost too much information about her in a weird sort of way. Shall I share my screen now?
Go ahead. Thank you, Anne.
Can I just say thank you for introducing yourself. I didn't know you were at Thames Poly. I'll talk to you sometime. I'm trying to write up my MPhil, which I did 30 years ago there.
Oh, lovely. We have to do that. I'm trying to write up what I've been doing for the last 30 years, and it takes far too long.
That's right.
Too slow, too difficult. Anyway, I'm going to be reading, so don't be embarrassed if I look in a different direction. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to talk about Madame Marie Celeste de Casteras Sinibaldi. And she was an inventor, an engineer, and a local resident. I'm pleased to be sharing it with you lot, because I know how good you are about industry and the things going on in Greenwich and Deptford. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to pick your brains, or that you can throw in a pebble into my story. The sort of questions that I'm still asking about Celeste, things like, was she really an inventor? Was she really an engineer? And how did she fit into the engineering community in Greenwich and Deptford in the mid-1860s? Her ambition was to save the... Sorry, I'm going to have to put a light on my text. I can't see what I'm reading. Here we go. Does that distract anyone? Good, no. Okay. Her ambition was to save the lives of sailors of the Royal Navy with inventions which would improve the quality of their ships and the safety of sailors. Her inventions and her attempts to bring them to manufacture are recorded in her letters. She was a complex and determined woman, struggling to support her family and achieve her unconventional ambitions. In 1990, as I was saying, I discovered the forgotten list of all the courageous women who signed the 1866 women's suffrage petition. They asked for the vote 40 years before the suffragettes, and their petition was presented to Parliament by Blackheath resident John Stuart Mill. This is a very soppy picture of that happening. Several interesting women signed in Greenwich, including Celeste Sinibaldi, who gave her address as 40 Trinity Square, Greenwich. I was hopeful of tracing her, but of course there is no Trinity Square in Greenwich, so that was a dead end. However, I did find her name attached to several patents taken out in the 1860s. Intriguingly, these were for a chain-making machine, processes to make tubes, and to laminate battleships, and the universal wise man hooker. Her address on these patents, as you can see, was 1 South Villas, South Street, Greenwich. One of these patents was the property of the 5th Duke of Buccleuch. It was the chain-making machine. I Googled his name and discovered that he was one of the wealthiest landowners in Britain. Following an inquiry to the Buccleuch estate, I received an email with this information from wonderful Crispin Powell, the Duke's archivist. Records relating to Marie Celeste de Casteras Sinibaldi are on loan to the National Records of Scotland. These records turned out to be over 150 letters from Madame Sinibaldi in South Street and Trinity Square, Bermondsey, to the Duke of Buccleuch, his solicitor or his secretary. Occasionally their draft replies survive. A second file of 1851 was of letters to the Duke of Buccleuch from his lawyers about Celeste's collaboration with an inventor named Jean-Dominique Cisco. Together, they were making a portable chain-making machines for use on ships. As well as many letters, there were enclosures including pamphlets, a poem, a pawn ticket, a sprig of white heather. I'd been researching 1,499 women for the past 27 years, and here, for the first time, was the unmediated voice of one of them. Dozens of the letters, some 17 pages long. Celeste addresses the Duke as a friend. She implores, chides, and flatters him in familiar tones. She would write to him at 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes she was desperate, resentful, angry. Sometimes she was triumphant. This was not just any voice, but the voice of a woman engineer in her 50s, frustrated by men. I'm going to read you an example of her, and it's actually the briefest letter I could find, so you get a flavour of how she writes. 1 o'clock in the morning, 30th of May, 1864. You do not read my long letters. This is short. Your Grace, if it is your will that the only patents for which 3 years ago you lent me money should not be taken, had I known that such a cruel fate was to be mine, that the chain patents should not be taken, I would never have asked to buy my plans from Mr. Lake and his improvement upon them. I implore your Grace to consider I never deserved such treatment. We are, thanks to the 8 months of hope to sell a patent of the chain which does not exist yet, reduced to the bitterest distress. I have begged of your Grace to grant me £50 a month till affairs move in a way or in another way. I have begged 50,000 to work because I had them to work with Mr. Bennet till the day in 19th of January 1863 he destroyed all my arrangements with the firm. Your Grace, be just. I cannot coolly assist in the ruin of my unfortunate children, and your justice will not suffer it. If you wish Mr. Nicol, who's the solicitor, or Mr. Pelham to manage everything, you are the master. But for the sake of God, answer, I implore your Grace, for death would be preferable to your Grace's hesitation, you who holds our existence in your hands. The papers, specifications, drawings are in your room, your Grace, in a long deal box, and every delay is enormous injury to all. Command Mr. Waite to visit what I have done at Greenwich, and you will see it is wise, if it is wise, to let perish what exists. I implore your Grace to answer my letter, though it is asking a great favour. It becomes urgent that I should hear my fate, whatever it may be, of your Grace, the ruined protégé, if you do not awake. Celeste Sinibaldi, née de Casteras. From 1862 to 1869, her correspondence shows her passionately and persistently fighting for investment in her chain and iron cladding, whilst she got deeper and deeper into debt. And I will just mention that the letters to the Duke are in a file labelled charity. There was a time when I think the family were more friends of the Duke and Duchess, but he's now distanced himself. Celeste was born into the aristocratic de Casteras family in the Charente region of France in 1808. This is the house that she used to call home La Rochette in Charente. Her father died when she was a teenager. She credited him for her mind filled with creative inventions because he had not filled it with education. As a young woman, she had been at the court of the exiled Charles X of France, but in 1841 she arrived in London and married Luigi Sinibaldi, a Corsican and former secretary to Napoleon's nephew. Luigi taught Italian and Celeste became a milliner. She may have been talented or more probably drawn on her aristocratic connections, for her clients included three of the Queen Victoria's closest intimates, Lady Locker, Lady Ashley, and this picture is of the Duchess of Buccleuch. By 1848, the Sinibaldis had 3 small children. They invested all their savings in railway shares, and their stockbroker embezzled the lot. They were in serious financial difficulties and turned to their aristocratic friends for help. They were given cash to clear the debts, and the Duke of Buccleuch got Luigi a job at Eton College teaching Italian. The 1851 census shows the Sinibaldis in lodgings near Eton. Luigi's brother Pierre, an engineer, is staying with them, and it's probably through him that Celeste met the prolific inventor Jean-Dominique Cisco, who was in Reading at the time. Celeste seems to have been so fascinated by his ideas. He was very keen on armaments, ships, bombs, all sorts of things like that. She became not only his passionate advocate, but also his apprentice. She learnt blacksmithing, brazing, and other metalworking skills. Celeste enthused the Duke with Cisco's idea for a chain-making machine. The Duke purchased the patent for them. And this was a chain-making machine you could have on board a ship, so you could either repair or make fresh chains when yours broke. In 1851, the chain was tested by the Admiralty at Woolwich Dockyard in the presence of Commander Henry Eden, Mr. MacDonald, Mr. Lang, Master Shipwright, Mr. Atherton, Chief Engineer, and of course, Mr. John Penn of marine engineering celebrity, of course you'll know of him, and a Mr. F.P. Smith, inventor of the screw propeller. They all witnessed experiments with a new description of chains submitted by Monsieur Cisco, a native of France. The Lords of the Admiralty having ordered that every facility should be afforded to ascertaining their quality compared with the chains now in Her Majesty's service. The chain nearly broke the testing machine as it was so strong. Jumping the gun, Celeste went to the press with a glowing account of this triumph before she received the official report. It appeared in the papers listing all these officials present, and the Admiralty took umbrage and refused to publish or give her their report, presumably because she hadn't observed their protocols. I'm hoping to trace the Admiralty side of this story at some time. Anyway, Cisco died in 1856. Celeste wanted to move on from patent, costing £50 or so, to actual manufacture. At this stage, letters from the Duke's solicitor reveal that the solicitor was already uneasy. No confidence can be placed in her. She's so excitable and easily led. You never could feel sure that any money placed at her disposal would be applied to the objects intended. I think, in fact, that at times Madame Sinibaldi is not in her right mind on these subjects. I've uniformly discouraged any hope that your Grace would in any way assist. I've never missed an opportunity of representing to her that this sort of thing was unsuitable to her circumstances, including her husband's appointment to Eton, and in every other respect. And that I know in the end it would be to again involve herself and her family in embarrassment and affliction. Luigi left his job at Eton in 1855 and tutored locally for a while. He then disappeared from the scene. It's possible or likely that he abandoned his family and returned to France. I found that he died in Paris in 1872 in a charitable hospital, and his death was recorded by strangers. His wife refers to him very occasionally, once as noble but helpless, and to herself as a wife without a husband. Celeste moved to North London with her teenage children. She apparently continued to work with iron, copper, and steel, taking on an apprentice, a Mr. Lake. She was experimenting with laminating iron and copper plates to armour battleships, etc., having taken out patents in 1862 and 1864. In 1862, she moved to 1 South Villas, South Street, Greenwich, probably because of the proximity of Greenwich to Woolwich Dockyard and the marine engineering works in the area. She rented out the house on the right-hand side of this picture, and her letters to the Duke date from this move. 1 South Villas was to be her home for the next 3 years. Around 1862 to 3, she also rented a wharf in Deptford Creek, which she continued to mention until 1866. In 1862, the Duke of Buccleuch paid for a stand in the prestigious International Exhibition in Kensington. Its huge pavilion stood where the Science Museum is now. The jurors there awarded her a prize medal for her chain, cable, and chain-making machine. This is how she describes the progress of chain making using the coiling machine. Roll yourself your iron, your hoop, and the devil can and will be chain in his black hole. With the chain from the roller to the cleaning machine, from the cleaning machine to the trough of water, boraxed from the trough to the drying room, from the drying room to the coiling machines. That's when they hit this device. From the coiling machine, the chain made must go to the hot room, from the hot room to the bath, where all the bands of each link come into one body, and from there to the hot room to cool, as the ancients made their sublime castings. This illustrated London News print of Shilling Day at the exhibition shows, in fact, many women in the diverse crowd. In an article about the exhibition, a visitor mentioned Celeste and the successful Admiralty test. He commented that for the past 11 years, Madame Sinibaldi toiled on, hoping against hope, and now she sits at her table at the exhibition with her chains and links and samples before her, explaining them all like the brave woman she is, and she insists on the applicability of the system, not merely to chains, but to armor plates. There's one woman seated at a table. She's wearing indoor clothing, and I very much wonder, here she is, if she is Celeste. I'll give you a quick extract from the plates, tubes and cylinders patent. Instead of laying the iron, steel, or sheets forming the compound plates with their surfaces together and placing them in a bath of molten metal in that position, I place between them thin sheets of copper, brass, or other metals. That her secret was that it was actually only copper. And after securing them closely together, I immerse them in the melted metal. The sheets of copper or brass must be thoroughly cleaned, as well as the plates of iron and steel, and immersed in a solution of borax or other flux before attempting to unite them. In making tubes or cylinders, I take a sheet of iron and steel and coat it with a thin coating of copper, brass, or other metal to coil it up tightly. Another method is to coil up a thin sheet of copper and a sheet or sheets of iron and steel and subject them to heat until the two metals are thoroughly fused together. And she ends up in the manufacture of plates or other objects for ornamental purposes. I first cut or stamp in a plate of iron and steel the design or form of ornament to be representative, and then, after preparing the plate in the ordinary manner, I place it in a mold or box, so arranged that the molten metal shall fill up the figures or design made in the plate. Instead of using iron or steel, I sometimes use plates of copper or brass or other metals and fill up the ornamental designs with silver, gold, and other metals. Celeste's two sons seem to have remained dependent at an age when most young men would be standing on their own 2 feet. She's endlessly worrying about them and trying to settle them in an engineer's or solicitor's office, only for them to drift again. Raphael spent time in Malta, courtesy of the Duke of Buccleuch. His brother Napoleon went to India, only to return with dysentery a few weeks later. Their teenage sister, Mary, was at home in South Street with her mother. She longed to help her by earning money as a teacher, but her mother was more concerned that she should not fall in love with an unsuitable man. The irony of this will become more apparent later. Celeste aimed to set up a company to manufacture her inventions. Her only apparent source of income was wine and brandy from her brother's vineyards in France. But since she could not afford the license to sell it, she illegally bartered bottles duty-free for food and laundry. She pawned her possessions in Leicester Square, as in this pawning of a silk dress, to pay the tradesmen in Greenwich. She owed a year's rent, the grocer and the washerwoman, and was threatened with jail for non-payment of excise duty and the rates. Yet still she dreamed of armouring ships for the national good. Her apprentice, Mr. Lake, found her a possible inventor, a Mr. Bennet, but he was deliberately discouraged by the Duke's current lawyer, Mr. Nicol. Mr. Nicol shared his predecessor's assessment of Celeste's mental state, but in this case actually stated that he was mad to the investor. Mr. Bennet immediately took fright and withdrew. In 1864, she found a supportive ally in Joseph Dominique Jobin, a Swiss engineer living in Greenwich, who had invented a stone-cutting machine. He had been awarded a large contract to cut the granite for the developments on the embankment. He was happy to take on part of the wharf at Deptford Creek, which Celeste had recently acquired. In June 1864, Mr. Dempster, her neighbour and lawyer, wrote to the Duke about the wharf in Deptford Creek. She has underlet a portion of the wharf to Mr. Jobin's company in order to have him near her, and in so doing she will have the benefit of his valuable advice and only have to pay about £30 per annum rent. There's a piece of ground at the back of the wharf, which I have seen the freeholder about, and has consented to let the same to her at a rent of £30 per annum, but for 80 years on the condition that £500 be spent in building. And as Mr. Jobin's company are very anxious to have the whole or a portion of this, Madame Sinibaldi has nothing to do but profit from the advice of Mr. Jobin. Now, she describes the position of the wharf briefly. From the observatory of Greenwich, the poor tried, that is herself, has seen the smoke of the engines running full speed and carrying her last hopes. I have not definitely located the wharf, and Mary Mills has been most helpful with her wonderful book, which I was going to wave at you. Here we go. And suggested that Sun Wharf by Halfpenny Hatch Bridge was a possibility, as it had a chimney and there is a gap in the occupancy at the correct period. However, I was also interested to find another possibility in her book, the One and All Wharf. As mentioned, I'd first discovered Celeste as part of my research into the women asking for the vote in 1866. Women canvassed friends and relations, revealing a fascinating network of support which spread across the country. These links also included radicalism, homeopathy, and spiritualism. One of the women who signed in Manchester was Mrs. E.O. Greening, whose husband, Mr. Edward Owen Greening, acquired the One and All Wharf for his cooperative venture sometime in the late 1860s, as recorded by Mary. This wharf fronted Creek Road and stretched down Stowage, and at one time had a chimney. However, on the other hand, members of the radical Solly family were also supporters of the petition. One person connected with Sun Wharf was an Isaac Solly Lister, who might prove still to be a connection. I've tried looking from the observatory and drawing a line on maps from the observatory to One and All and Sun Wharf, but both experiments were unconclusive, particularly because all the maps seemed to split between the two and you have to match them up in some way. Sadly, Mr. Jobin died in 1867, and there's no more mention of the wharf thereafter. In 1864, a Mr. John Livingston was introduced. This is the laminating a battleship with a little trolley going round, which was the patent we were talking about. In 1864, a Mr. John Livingston was introduced to her. Some years earlier, he had taken out adverts like this, offering money for promoting projects. He seemed to have acted as some sort of broker between inventors and entrepreneurs. He wrote a 4-page memorandum for Celeste outlining the business opportunity, offering 3 patents to be worked and promising profits of many thousands of pounds. He concluded, "The patents are the property of a lady, willing to dispose of them to a party who by working them shall give the public the benefit of inventions that have consumed the better part of her life and a considerable fortune." Mr. Livingstone introduced her to the Millwall Ironworks Shipbuilding and Graving Docks Company, who she describes as desiring her to make some new experiments on their premises, but at her own expense. She begged them to prove their ability to pay £4,000 and state that they would pay that sum to her should the experiment be satisfactory. They declined, and in fact, she realised they only wanted to see her method of manufacture and then go ahead and do it without her. And Mr. Robert Baxter appears, and she describes whose experience in forming companies is well known. Mr. Baxter introduces her to a Mr. Girdlestone, and with others, a company seems to be being formed. The company agrees to give £2,000 down for the patents, £1,500 in 6 months, and £1,500 in 6 more months, and 20% of all returns. Things seem to be becoming hopeful, but the investors were still needed, and they were reluctant. Several engineering companies had shown an interest in her techniques, but she was desperate to set up a company herself. She was proud of her determination to be independent. She wrote, "Ask them if locked up in an infernal petticoat, they could have done in a foreign land what is done, a system brought to such a state that it has obtained orders from all quarters." She needed to persuade businessmen and manufacturers to raise and invest the thousands of pounds needed. And this was when she came up against the full force of her unequal status. Not to mince words, most regarded her as mad, and some said so, as we heard. As a married woman, legal negotiations for partnerships were problematic. One can understand the reluctance of manufacturers to invest in her untried ideas, especially when advocated by a woman whose dream was to save the British Navy. She found that investors recommended to her by the lawyers often turned out to be unsuitable. She did encounter honest and reputable businessmen who were willing to give her a chance. One such was the brickmaker George Smead of Sittingbourne. His was a rags to riches story, and he was happy to help others to rise too. He offered her a space to work at his riverside brickworks, but she refused as she was desperate to control her own company. Avoiding actually investing in her enterprise when there was no certainty of return did seem a sensible approach on his part. Other men genuinely saw her ambitions as viable, but also maybe saw personal benefit from encouraging her. Again, none of these were prepared to put their money where their mouth was, but they were very helpful at writing prospectuses and also suggesting people who might invest. At one point, a company actually seemed possible. She described potential investors as including Captain Fishbourne, she said, unspotted character and most scientific man in gunnery, another Navy man, Captain Inglefield, Mr. Turner, a lawyer, and George Rumble of the Royal Navy, the inspector of all the machinery afloat. And this is at the head of that company, she wrote, were my rival John Brown, the mayor of Sheffield. who, having plundered a fraction of my mode of making the plates, hearing that I was going to work, did throw himself into my waters, fearing to be drowned if he did not, and sure to swim with me if he did. He, of course, was the successful ironmaster in Sheffield, who made a fortune from laminating ships with copper. Without asking the Duke, she'd assumed that he'd agreed to be chair of the board of the British Navy's Conservation Company. When he refused, all the potential investors melted away. I think that probably John Brown actually bought her copper lamination of ships patent to, because of his interest in that field. He certainly paid her a small amount of money. At one point, she suggested a scheme whereby investors would get her imported wine and brandy for their money, as well as shares. At last, hope was revived. The Admiralty were interested in the anti-scaling potential of her copper lamination process. She wrote to the Duke at 5 o'clock in the morning on the 29th of June, 1864, again to beg for a loan of £5,000. The Lords of the Admiralty have given me a proof of the value they attach to my mode of coating. A little parcel weighing only 8 tons is arriving for me at Deptford. This piece measures 15 feet long, 5 feet thick, 6 inches wide. She had found a supporter or paid advocate in her neighbour, Mr. Dempster. He was able to write succinctly, whereas she tended to fill 17 pages. When this letter that she'd just written received no response, Mr. Dempster wrote, "I'm urged once more to address you, or I would not again have troubled you. The government have given Madame an armour plate weighing 8 tons, a great concession on their part, and one which says much in her favour. It is a fearful discouragement to Madame, after receiving this, to find you cannot advance the money for her to work with, as I cannot either. On all hands, Madame has, I am informed, practical men who are highly in favour of her inventions, but they are useless to her if she cannot carry them out." The reply from the Duke's lawyer was direct. "I write to inform you that when His Grace assisted Madame Sinibaldi with money to take out the patents of her inventions, she was distinctly informed that on no account would His Grace have anything to do with the working of the patents, neither would he advance money for that purpose. In the course of numerous applications on the part of Madame Sinibaldi to induce His Grace to depart from the above resolution, the same answer has been invariably given, nor is His Grace now disposed to alter this determination." Some of these difficulties must have been caused by professionals unused to dealing with a woman in business. Celeste was certainly persistent, passionate, and determined, and perhaps her passion could appear excessive. More serious problems were posed for her by confidence tricksters, men eager to take advantage of her vulnerability. After the British Navy's Conservation Company failed to get going, Celeste's apprentice, Mr. Lake, realised that he was in a strong position to exploit his familiarity with Celeste's more secret processes. If John Brown of Sheffield considered the patent viable, then he could blackmail Celeste by threatening to take her secrets to Brown or another rival. Celeste was forced to pay him £700 and increase his salary. The next year, she could not pay all his wages, so he summonsed her for the debt. He had a serious hold over her, which he could exploit at any time. When shortly afterwards he became seriously ill, she remarked wryly that such misfortunes often came to those who crossed her. Mr. Rumble, the Admiralty engineer involved in the proposed company, seemed to be genuinely supportive. But in fact, there was another side to this man, which makes me wonder about his motives. In 1864, the very year he was collaborating with Celeste, the press recorded that he had been charged with having aided the enemy. He had organised the fitting out and crew for a redundant Royal Navy ship, HMS Victor, or Scylla, as it was also known. Partly refitted, she steamed off to Calais, where she hoisted the American Confederate flag and became renamed as the Rappahannock. Fortunately, her engines had burned out on the way to Calais. She was impounded by the French and given to the victors at the end of the American Civil War. Mr. Rumble was found not guilty and returned to his Admiralty post, but in 1874 he was convicted of soliciting a bribe of a timber merchant who wanted to supply wood to Sheerness Dockyard, and he was imprisoned for 7 months. Sadly, Celeste was both single-minded and gullible. She was the perfect prey for an experienced confidence trickster. Before she left South Street, an extraordinary story began to unfold. Mysterious hints appear in her letters. Her daughter reminds her that they are of Moorish descent. She has valuable curiosities given by Yusuf Ali, chieftain of the tribe of Ali. She expects an opportunity to laminate a ship for the Pasha of Egypt. She has the opportunity to deal in raw silk and coffee. By February 1865, she reveals all. Mary has married Ali. Fearing to see my only daughter someday reduced to implore pity, Ali, the son of the chief of tribe of Arabs, Ali, wished to marry her. Now Mary is Haram Ali. Her husband is a man of great superiority and of immense military, commercial, political economy, a prince merchant, having antipathy for speculation, but his tribe, his family, trade in coffee, spices, and raw silk, which is as safe as gold. He has no credit, for he never does business but by ready money. He has in Lower Abyssinia, and his father has in Jerusalem, properties. Because the groom did not handle cash, Celeste paid for the wedding by pawning more of her possessions. Mary, of course, agreed to the marriage because it offered her mother and brothers financial security. By the 11th of July, Celeste had moved out of South Street and had been installed in furnished rooms at 102A Regent Street, above the Bazar Joseph Arabian Gallery. And on the 24th of October, she wrote, private till it becomes public if I cannot help it. If I wrote this from India, you would hesitate to believe it. The only daughter, the dearest of our family, has been legally, by a most criminal and unprecedented conspiracy, the victim of a mock marriage with a man expert in all crimes. False names, false title, false nation, false fortune. Had not the wisest been trapped by him before me, I never would rest 1 hour. And the next 4 years she spent trying to rescue her daughter. Yusuf Daniel Ben Huliel one of his many and varied names, already had an English wife and 2 children in North London. His plan was to send Celeste to Egypt with her sons in the pretext of importing silk, etc. And he planned to abandon them there without money and himself reap the benefit of her marvelous inventions. Ironically, it was a case of bite a bit, since Celeste's positive promotion of her schemes was completely unrealistic. So Mary ended up as a skivvy in the shop in Regent Street with a controlling husband who loathed her mother. Celeste moved to cheap lodgings in Trinity Square, Bermondsey, and she did employ detectives with help from the Duke to prove Benjulial was a bigamist, but with no avail. And in 1868, Mary Alley, wife of an Oriental merchant, died in childbirth in Liverpool, where she rests in an unmarked grave. Celeste's final invention, the universal wise man cooking stove, was patented in 1866, the year she asked for the vote. She promised that it would not only roast, boil, and bake, but eventually also do the washing, drying, and ironing. The patent says, this invention has for its object improvements in the methods of constructing stoves or apparatus for cooking. I construct my stove or apparatus of any suitable size with an inner tube or tubes placed upright or in other suitable position, with a grating or gratings at the bottom thereof, forming the fireplace or fireplaces. This tube or tubes I surround with water by placing an outer tube or tubes of larger size and of similar or other shape according to the purpose for which the apparatus may be required. The upper part of the stove is closed by a plate furnished with a hole or openings for the reception of the bottoms of cooking vessels, a passage being formed to conduct the smoke and products of combustion to a chimney. The apparatus may be made of various sizes and designs according to the purpose. It can be made of wholly or in part of tin plate, wrought or cast iron, other suitable metal, and when constructed according to my invention, will be found economical in the cost of construction, efficient and cleanly in its action, and will effect a great saving in the fuel used to heat it. Oh, she's a girl of our age, isn't she? Recycling and so on. The fuel employed may be wood, charcoal, coal, coke, gas, oil, spirits, or other inflammable matters. One last time she approached Buccleuch for funding to kickstart her enterprise. I have the hope to sell my own invention to the camps, and I have plenty orders. These were the volunteer soldier camps that were held all around the country in the summer, and obviously needed to do their cooking in the campground. She says, I have plenty orders, though they only cost 7 shillings to make, and I could sell them only 15 shillings, but I have no more small capital. The universal or Wiseman cooking apparatus can be either as big as the pavilion of Montague House or as small as the hat of a man. The Duke refused. This was the last letter in the file. For 7 years, from 1862 to 1869, we can follow the extraordinary efforts of a deserted mother with 3 dependent children as she struggled to set up a manufacturing business in Deptford. Many questions remain. How did she come to begin this journey? What inspired her passion? What happened to her afterwards? Why was she forgotten? Even the genealogists among her descendants seem unaware of her inventions. As a forgotten, unsuccessful failure, why should one care about this long dead woman? Would a woman like her meet the same fate today, or are things quite different? Celeste died in 1879 in Paris, with her son Napoleon and a nephew at her side. In one of her last letters to the Duke, a decade earlier, she wrote, "The fact is that finding out that moneyed men had no real wish to buy my great schemes, I made an invention quite fit for a woman. Though I believe in the real value of genuine women." And that letter was signed Celeste Sinibaldi, née de Casteras, the unconquered blacksmith. That's it.
Thank you. That was wonderful. If you can stop sharing the screen, then we can see each other.
Okay, so stop share.
Yeah, there we are. Good. That was wonderful. I was really, why did nobody ever hear of her until you discovered her?
Sorry?
Why has nobody ever heard of her until you discovered her in your research?
Well,
I
I
mean, why-
think apart from the fact that her patents, apart from the 3 patents, and she was obviously thousands of patents were done every year, and also quite a number of them were by women. So that those sunk without, I mean, I think the patent, which was just an idea, it didn't have to have proof in Britain, was just an idea flung upon the air, and if it never got picked up, it got picked up, I assume. And the letters, as I say, I mean, the National Library of Scotland has files and files and files and files of the Duke of Buccleuch's papers. They own half Scotland and half England, as far as I can see. So, you know, they're definitely buried there. You know, they're just in a file called Charity. I mean, there's not even her name. So, no, I mean, she's just forgotten, basically. But this is the case with most of the women who signed the petition. Yeah. You know, apart now that you can find census and so on, you find things about them. But no, I mean, there's, and I suppose now someone like her, she'd have a blog, she'd have a, you know, she'd be marketing herself, she'd be twittering, you know, she'd get the attention because she had the energy, you know.
And she would get a degree in engineering from somewhere and get a job. I mean, yes.
Absolutely, yes. Though I think she was quite, she feels eccentric. She feels perhaps as if she wouldn't necessarily fit into an engineering department unless they were sort of nurturing, excited by innovation place, which one hopes exists.
Some are, yes. Does she have any descendants? You mentioned that the family didn't know anything about her.
Yes, well, Mary died, as I say, in childbirth and obviously didn't have a child, didn't have a surviving child. But both Raphael and Napoleon, by the way, had one godfather who was Napoleon's nephew, and a Duke Lord Ashley as his godparents. No, they had children and they have descendants now. But interestingly, in the 1900s, one of the children got married to a family in Essex who were obviously keen on their credentials, and they mentioned the father, Luigi, as having worked for the Prince of Naples and the Napoleons, but don't mention her at all. I mean, she was an embarrassment. And that's an awful thing to say. And bearing in mind that the sons always were writing to her saying, give us some, give us a bit of money, or she was getting money to get them educated. I think she must have been quite difficult to deal with as a mother, and perhaps that put them off taking her seriously.
Yeah. Yes, I know what you mean about other mothers. Anyway, did you find where she'd lived in Trinity Square, or did you just
Yes, it was 40 Trinity Square.
Is that Trinity Church Square?
Yeah, Trinity Church Square, that's correct. Yes, yes. And in fact, she describes a bit of her life there. She had neighbours who she went and helped. I mean, she sounds really kind, actually. There's a letter where she misses someone who she thinks is a messenger from the Duke bringing money, because she's gone to look after a neighbour and bring her little treats like some brandy and gruel. So I think she was a very I like her. I think I would have liked her.
Brandy and wine smuggling on the side. What is not to like? Has anybody got any questions? I've got some comments. Elizabeth says, thank you, Anne. Interesting to speculate on the problems caused to Greenwich tradesmen and women. Yeah. David White says, great story told with passion and vigour. Fate of many inventors of all sexes, which is probably true. Yes. Anybody would like to ask a question?
Is it possible I can ask one, please?
Sorry?
Can I ask one? Is that all right?
Please,
Yeah,
yes.
Yes, thanks very much. I'm probably going to come across as a bit of an annoying person here. I'm actually doing a PhD on the 5th Duke. So I work very close. I look at his industrial history and his charitable history. I have there's a few things going through my head. 1860s, the early period, that's when his wife, Duchess Charlotte Anne, who you showed an image of holding a chair. I don't know what child, some lovely little cherub. She converted to Roman Catholicism.
Yes,
So
yes.
I'm wondering if this is maybe factored into his mindset. He got quite frustrated with certain individuals. I'm also curious.
I can tell you something about the Catholicism. She obviously debated.
Yeah.
She mentions debating with the Duchess about Catholicism, but also she says that the only church that she goes to, she's in Greenwich, in South Street. Her house backs onto a charitable hospital with a little chapel. And she says that's the only church she goes to.
Okay.
And she does, in fact, it's curious because when the Duchess converted, she's quite offended that the Duchess is, detaching herself from her. And is it because she isn't being a devout Catholic?
Yeah, because I'm curious because I've done some analysis of the charitable activity of the Duke, which there's some really good examples. There was an ornithological society that asked for some charity, and he went, "I care not about canaries," and didn't give them any money. So what I'm curious here is there was a bit of a pattern with the Duke where if one individual got a considerable amount of money, he wouldn't then keep, he wouldn't keep giving them money because others had to be in receipt of charity as well. I'm just wondering if she maybe hit the limit. She kind of overdrew her bank account with the Duke, so to speak. And I'm wondering if that was a factor.
One of the things that's noticeable is that the daughter, Mary, talks of knowing. I mean, I think that when her children were young, they actually visited the Duke and this sort of thing. And Mary speaks very kindly of the Duke, and he's still, helping this one to go to India or that one to go there. And I think the thing is that there must have come a point at which there was a fracturing of the friend, this close friendship.
Yeah.
Because even so from 1862, when these letters they are then put into the charity file, and they're dealt with by the solicitors. But that when Mary has this dreadful thing happen, or when the son needs a new job, the Duke does still come up. And of course, the other thing is that actually there are probably files in aristocratic libraries all over the country.
Yeah.
Certainly the Lord Ashley, I always forget what his Duke, Shaftesbury, they helped her when she was initially in the 40s, but also he paid one of the sons an allowance in the 1860s. So I think she must have had several people to call on.
Yeah, no, really interesting. Thank you. And hopefully I'll get your contact details through Crispin, and hopefully be in touch. But no, really interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, great. You've got my email address, because I've just sent you the Zoom instructions, so I can, if you email me, I can pass you on to Anne as well.
Brilliant. That sounds great. Thank you very much.
Any more questions or comments? Oh yes, Philip Bin says the little chapel to which Anne refers would have been that at Queen Elizabeth's aunt's houses, standing opposite Greenwich. Yeah, standing opposite Greenwich. Yeah, so that would be the chapel.
That's right. Yes, and in fact, hers was the first house in the row on that side of South Street. South Villas was actually in South Street. So her house, as she talks about watching the pensioners hobbling around towards their death out of her back windows, and how that was the chapel that she attended.
Now officially called Greenwich South Street, isn't it? To distinguish itself from all sorts of other South Streets around the country. Yeah. Good. Thank you. That has been wonderful. Anybody would like to jump in with a further comment? Mary? Hello, Mary.
I don't know if you can hear me or not.
Yes, I can hear you, Mary.
You cut off my video.
I haven't cut off your video, but let me.
Well, the system says you have.
I can ask you to start it again, but I can't. Anyway, there you are.
Oh yeah, okay. It kept putting up error messages saying the host has cut you off. No, I haven't got anything else to say. Apart from advertising next time, I suppose.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, do you want to talk? Thank you, Anne. Have you got anything else to add? Oh, Elizabeth Percy says, the most recent journal of the Newcomen Society has an article about other patents of armor plating.
Oh,
yes, it's an article by David Worsnell, who's based in Sheffield. He's an independent researcher, and he obviously mentions the John Brown methods of armor plating. But so far as I can see, he doesn't mention Sinibaldi at all.
no, but I'd be very interested to see that, because I've been trying to find if are there any records about his, John Brown in Sheffield, and how that his process, to discover if Celeste actually her ideas are incorporated or whatever. She does seem to suggest that he did buy at least one of the patents, but for some, she was so desperate for money, she probably sold it just to, pay the grocer or something, sadly.
Yeah.
Right. I'll get the reference to you, Anne.
That would be really helpful. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay. Mary, do you want to mention now what, I should say before we finish that I've recorded this, and I will at some point, especially now I'm no longer working full time, I will actually get this up on our YouTube channel to join some of the others that we've had over the last 2 years, since October 2020, so nearly 3 years, 2.5 years of talks we've got there. A great resource, and I will edit this and put it up there. And if you want to find the previous one, just go to YouTube and search for Greenwich Industrial History, and it will be there. And I will add this when I have time over the next few weeks. Don't have to work a 9-to-5 job anymore, or a 9-to-6 job anymore. Anyway, I will do that fairly shortly, and then I'll put a message up on the Facebook group that it's there, and other things are there. Mary, next, you want to talk about the next talk?
Well, you maybe know more than I do now. It's on the 9th of May, and it's Nick Hyam talking about his book, which it is called The Mercenary River, but I don't know if he's going to call the talk that.
Well, I'm seeing him tomorrow at the Glyas meeting, so I'll ask if he wants to tweak the title. Yeah, but
okay, well that's it really. We have anyone with suggestions for next year should get in touch with me.
Yeah, sure. Have you got some lined up for autumn onwards?
Have I got some
more talks lined up for autumn onwards?
Yes, we're booked right the way through to I think next February, but hopefully Elizabeth Wiggins will do June. She if you remember last year, she pulled out because of the heat wave.
Oh, I remember, yes.
And so we continue if you like. It's not difficult.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. Would you like to say a formal thank you to Anne for an absolutely wonderful, entrancing presentation?
Oh,
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your time.
yes, thank you, Anne. It's wonderful.
It's been great. Thank you very much indeed. And it's now 8:42. So I will say goodbye to everybody, unless anybody wants to jump in. But thank you very much indeed. Okay, bye-bye, and thank you, Anne.
Goodbye.
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 Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye. Thanks, Anne.